In the previous video, we've created this is type zone weight empty, but the truth is we're actually checking if it's not empty. So perhaps we should rename it a little bit. We're gonna have it not empty. So is type zone weight not empty, because that's going to return true when neither of this is empty, and then obviously rename it inside of the is duplicate local. Now one thing, because it's in just a moment we're going to create another method which will require obviously checking whether any of the 3 parameters passed to the method are also empty, and we could perhaps reuse this method. The only thing is we're going to create another private method rather than create one which is saying, let's say, is any 3 empty or anything like that. And the reason behind this is because sometimes you may check if it's empty just by using the PHP empty method and some function, and sometimes you can check using our helper is empty, which checks if it isn't a numerical value as well as is empty, basically. So it's best to have all these private methods separately inside of the given class, because first of all we get the naming, so obviously we don't have to check, we don't have to put any comments. This method practically tells us what this method does, this method name. And second of all, obviously at any time if we need to add another parameter to the method, we only have to change this for the specific method. So obviously if it was like a combined one method, like a helper method, let's say, then would change this property for all of the methods, not necessarily something that we would want to happen. So if we scroll down, now that we have obviously renamed this one to is type zone weight not empty, if we scroll down to the next method, which is add shipping, this one now will become much shorter. We're going to remove everything from within this method and simply return this underscore db insert, and we go for this underscore table, and we pass the array. We're adding basically a new shipping to the shipping table. Now get shipping by ID type zone is the method which I've mentioned earlier. As you can see, we again checking for 3 parameters if any of them is empty. But we're going to create a separate method. Again, private function, and it's going to be is ID type zone not empty. And we pass in the ID as the first parameter, then type ID and zone ID. And as I said, this could be exactly the same method as the previous one. We could even use the same method, but then obviously the naming would be the problem here. And if at any time this statement would need to be increased by another parameter, which at some point we may add to this method, then obviously that would affect the other method as well. So it's best to keep it separate, basically. And now we simply return, and we're checking. We just cut this if everything from inside of this if statement and paste it into this return one here, so it tells us basically if it's not empty. And now what we do is basically check if this is not empty, and we go for the ID, type ID and zone ID. And here we're going for the where statement when we are changing all these assignments to question marks, and remove this, and remove this int val functions. And obviously now at the bottom, this the underscore db fetch one, and then we pass in the array with ID, type ID, and then zone ID. And after this if statement, let me scroll, we simply return null if obviously this is ID type zone not empty has returned false.